Thom Hartmann here on the news. You need to know this. All eyes are on the stock market again today as investors brace themselves for another turbulent day on Wall Street after stocks plummeted 634 points yesterday on news of the U.S. credit rating downgrade. Overnight, Asian markets were awash in a sea of red ink early on in trading, with the South Korean market down as much as 10%, but most markets then made modest comebacks before the closing bells. While the credit downgrade played a huge part in yesterday's market chaos, it's becoming increasingly clear that the real reason the markets are shedding wealth is because the American economy is deteriorating. Today, the Federal Reserve is meeting to discuss ways to stabilize the stagnating economy, and there is talk of another round of quantitative easing, even though the first two rounds have done little to improve the situation for most Americans on Main Street. And when it comes down to it, there's not much the Fed can do anymore, especially now that Republicans in Congress succeeded in sabotaging any hopes of an economic recovery by shoving austerity measures down our throats and stopping any stimulus whatsoever. No nation in the history of this world has ever cut its way to prosperity, not one. John Boehner bragged he got 98% of what he wanted in last week's debt limit deal. So Republicans get 98% of the blame for the coming economic crisis. The other 2% goes to President Obama for failing to fight them hard enough and thus empowering Tea Party radicals and the billionaires who fund them to hijack America. First the Arab Spring, now the European summer. Violent riots continued for the third straight day across London and a number of other British cities, leaving buildings ablaze, cars torched and turned over, and storefronts vandalized and looted. The riots began in Tottenham after police shot a man to death, but it quickly became clear that the unrest was less about police brutality and more about conservative austerity. Some of the cities hit hardest by conservative governments' deep spending cuts are now fueling the worst riots the UK has seen since the 1980s, promoting the man responsible for those cuts, Prime Minister David Cameron, to rush back from a trip to Italy for a meeting with his National Crisis Committee. He's also calling Parliament back from its summer recess and has tripled the number of police on the streets. First Greece, now the UK. What we're seeing unfold in Europe today is the harsh backlash of poor and working people against governments that bailed out banksters, cut taxes for billionaires, and are now cutting services to average working people and the poor. And like Hosni Mubarak, these bankster governments are now losing their consent to govern. Is Washington paying attention? In the best of the rest of the news, Judgment Day in Wisconsin. Today, 6 Republican state senators who supported Governor Scott Walker's anti-union, anti-working class efforts are now fighting for their political lives in the biggest recall election ever held in this country. With control of the state Senate at stake, if Democrats pick up 3 wins today, these recall elections are a referendum on the union busting that's been sweeping the nation, not just in Wisconsin, but also in Indiana, New Jersey, Michigan, Florida, wherever else Republicans have declared war on working-class Americans. And no one knows this better than the corporate millionaires and billionaires who've been funding the union busting and are now throwing enormous amounts of cash into defending their Republican lapdogs in these recall elections. What looked like Democratic shoe-in victories earlier this year have now tightened up, as $28 million in mostly corporate cash from the likes of the Koch brothers has been spent so far on these recall elections. We'll see if democracy can still thrive, or if another major election in America will be subverted by corporate interests using last year's Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. The Japanese government willingly let thousands of its own citizens be exposed to dangerously high levels of radiation. Not only were Japanese officials withholding information early on in the Fukushima nuclear crisis regarding meltdowns, they were also withholding information about spreading radiation to their citizens. Days after the quake and tsunami, thousands of residents of Fukushima fled to the city of Nami, where they were told it was safe from the leaking radiation. It's now been learned that government models showed clouds of radiation moving directly over the city of Nami, yet not a word of warning was given to the people. That's because the officials were not only trying to avoid responsibility and downplay the incident, but they also didn't want to trigger another costly evacuation. The mayor of Nami, Tamototsu Baba, says the government's decision to not release this information is, in his words, murder. Of the nearly 1,100 children living around the Fukushima plant, nearly half now test positive for thyroid exposure to radiation. This is a nuclear power tragedy and a crime on an epic scale. A question of personhood will be debated in Montana. Secretary of State there, Linda McCullough, approved a ballot initiative to amend the state's constitution definition of a person to include all human beings at every stage of development, including the stage of fertilization or conception. If this far right-wing measure collects the 48,000 signatures it needs to be put on the ballot and then is passed, then it will mean birth control is a form of murder in Montana. The war on women continues. without a single word about the real personhood debate America should focus on, whether or not corporations like ExxonMobil are people. We need to end both the war on women and end corporate personhood now. Crazy alert, the rent is too damn low. James McMillan, the figurehead of New York's The Rent is Too Damn High political party, is being evicted from his Manhattan apartment because his rent is too damn low. McMillan claims he's been paying $872 a month for the rent-controlled apartment since the 1970s. And now the landlord wants to kick him out so he can start charging more. McMillan is taking the case to court. Win or lose, now that we know McMillan has been paying less rent than most other New Yorkers, time for a new party? How about the gas is too damn high party? Or with global warming clobbering us, how about the temperature is too damn high party? And that's the way it is today, Tuesday, August 9th, 2011. I'm Thom Hartmann on the news.